Thank you, Xavier. Thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you for inviting me. It's a great honor to be here. So let me share my screen with you. All right. So what I'm going to talk about is data or data journalism with R. I think it's not a very high-tech talk, but I think it would be maybe interesting for some of you to see how R is actually used inside a newsroom. And when I say newsroom, is not on the analytics or marketing side, but really on the editorial side to produce news stories. First, a few words about myself. So I don't have any actually background in journalism. I have a PhD in computational biology. I worked like in finance for a few years. And I started in 2014 as a data journalist at the Swiss Public Radio and TV, I mean on the online part. And since last year, I work for Tamedia. So if you're not familiar with the Swiss media landscape, Tamedia is the biggest private media company, owns many popular media brands, such as 20 Minutes, The Tages and Sage, 24 Heures, and so on and so forth. And I'm based in Lausanne, and we are about maybe 10 data journalists, data scientists at Tamedia between Zurich, Lausanne, Geneva. So yeah. We actually mainly use Python, but I'm the one mainly using R. And when I was before the SatRday, that was actually mainly R ecosystem that we used. All right, so the field I work in, media, could be called data journalism or data-driven journalism. Just to say a few words about it, it's often shortened as DDJ. And it was like coined in 2009, where people got the epiphany. All of a sudden, they realized in the newsroom that they could analyze data themselves and create visualization and stories from the raw data. I mean, that sounds pretty obvious or straightforward thing to do now, but yeah, at the time we really used to interview specialists and do like traditional journalism. I would say that data journalism is not new. I mean, a lot of newspaper before did their own analysis of data, like the FT or the Economist. But I think what became a new thing because of those four different phenomenon at the time, like rise of data, open data, like there was really much more data to work with, more new tool like Tableau or Data Wrapper and R, obviously. And the media landscape changed quite a bit. We started be flooded with like news and information. And I guess the data journalism was a way to, I mean, still a way to produce like news story. I mean, have a new take on interesting topics. I want to say as well that I'm going to talk about how I use R for data journalism, but many newsrooms use R. I mean, I know it's used at the New York Times or the Economist, FT, BBC, Guardian. So I'm just going to talk mainly about my experience, but obviously it's pretty common in the field. So what I use R for in data journalism, I mean, sorry, I'll start again. What kind of stories I cover in data-driven journalism? So basically any type of story, such as very short-term stories, breaking news, or more long-term stories, which I call explainer, which is more like a magazine type of article. Or I also do, I'm involved in investigative reporting, where I collaborate usually with other journalists, and usually investigative reporting has a lot of data. So we kind of work together on that. We cover any type of geo levels, like really local, national, or international stories. And what I like the most, I guess, about my job is that we cover any really sections, not only data heavy sections such as sports or economics, but culture, politics, whatever. I work mainly alone, I would say, but also quite a lot of collaboration with other data journalists or front-end team. front-end development or graphic designer or other journalists often as well, whether it's within the same building or outside from another Tamedia newspaper and so on. And I want to focus that the output always has to be a story. I mean, obviously, I always on the hunt for data, interesting data to analyze, but it should always be a story at the end. So the output should typically text or graphics. So I'm preaching to the choir here, but why do data journalists use R? For all those reasons I listed here, the first is reproducibility. We often get data, recurring data that's like changed every month or year, and it's quite useful. I mean, it's very important to be able to run the same code to get the same results. Also, I use quite a lot of R Markdown to share my analysis with my boss, the other journalists, so they can see the analysis and find like stories or that they use for interviews. Obviously, RStudio is great. There's a big part with the getting loading data that R is really great because since I get data in various really quality and forms, such as crappy Excels or getting data from an API, from the database and so on. I think this is really nice to get all those different tools. And I think RVest is a very nice is to scrape website. So I don't know if you're familiar with web scraping. It means downloading data from a website where there's no API, basically. So that's part of Tidyverse. I use that a lot, but I think the main component of my work is all the tidy and deploy package. So again, all the data wrangling is actually central to what I do. And then all the graphical parts, which obviously we know R is great. So ggplot2, obviously. I recently switched to SF for everything geospatial. Also amazing to integrate that with Tidyverse. So I think all this part with quick exploratory data analysis, because we often have to produce stories fast. So for R is great for that. And finally, I also use R to make interactives with HTML widgets or gggraph. I'll show you that later. But I also sometimes give that to a front-end developer that would produce that in D3 and JavaScript. But I personally only produce my interactives with R. All right, so I'm going to cover now some of the stories I did with R. First, I want to talk some of the really short-term stories, like stories, you get the data and you have maybe just 1 or 2 days to get the story out. Because if it takes longer, basically, it's not really relevant to read anymore. And I had an example planned, but actually with the latest news, I said to talk about something called coronavirus. And so it was just, it's not the most exciting art project, but I think it was quite apropos to talk about that. So basically the question or the goal was that obviously we heard a lot about that the last few days. And I wanted to show the evolution per cantons of the number of cases. I mean, it's quite straightforward thing, I guess. I mean, nothing groundbreaking really. So let me show you, I mean, go through the process actually. So I produced a chart actually yesterday. I just updated a few minutes ago, which is great to be run the same script because I got new data every day. So let me show you through the pain sometimes you have to go through to get to produce this kind of graphic and how R can be used. So let me go to explain how I get the data. So unfortunately, there was no like clean data. Obviously at this time the FSP, I mean the Swiss Federal Health whatever office is overwhelmed, and every day they produce a report like that. about the date, and you get not even a table, but a map, and not even a, a map that you can parse the PDF. So you have basically to input those values per canton into a table, and you get that every day. And they don't even keep the history of the file, so you really have to actually word the script to scrape that file every day and to version control it. So what I had to do is I had to manually input the data into Google Sheet. You can see the Google Sheet here, so the date, the number of cases. I have different sheet for number of deaths. The advantage of, I mean, I don't want to, there's probably other ways to do it, but the Google Sheet was nice because other people can fill it, and there's a full history. You can, I mean, some kind of version control in a way that you can easily go back in time and see who did what in the Google Sheet. And I can show you actually the script I did. Let me go back. Why can I not exit? I have some problems with my keynote. I cannot exit the presentation. I'm very sorry, but I think I have to deconnect and reconnect because.
No, Duc, maybe you can just stop sharing your screen and maybe try.
I'll do that. Yes.
Yeah.
Try that. But I cannot even select that.
And even if you press escape, sometimes.
Well, I can do it for you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. You still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so let me keep that. Okay, let me reshare my screen with you. So just to go through the process, here is a script. I use this Google Sheet for package that actually allows you to connect to a Google Sheet. And let me move that. So it doesn't do anything really groundbreaking because the table is like in wide format. It like pivot it and make it long and do some kind of wrangling. And I mean, it's nothing, again, groundbreaking. I'm just going to generate, actually, I just entered the value of today in that table just before, so I can regenerate that GIF. I guess in the long term, we want to build a dashboard. We'll probably do more stories about it. I mean, it's very new. I just want to show you how useful it is to have a code-based graphic. So now I can update that GIF every day. And also, by the way, if anybody is an epidemiologist or has really good idea of what story to do with that, please get in touch. So I use DGAnimate to generate the GIF. Here we go. It was just up to date with the latest data that was the report that was released today. Let me go back to presentation. I want to say that actually yesterday, that graph, the chart was actually used in the print of 24 Heures, and we're probably going to make quite more use of it. Another example of what I call breaking news stories. So I guess you were aware then last October, there was a federal elections where people voted to elect the parliament. So the surprise that after the results was that the Green parties, there are two Green parties, the Green and the Green Liberals, gained a lot of seats. And my idea was just to do a quick data analysis to show which basically which municipalities got voted the most for those green parties, or where in Switzerland those two parties got the most like increase in votes compared to 4 years ago. Was to explain, there's a huge data set I get from the Swiss Statistical Office. He had the JSON feed. This data is really clean, but he has like the 2,000 municipalities and like results for each of the parties. And what I did was really a quick and dirty EDA. I think from the moment I got the data, by the evening I had produced a story. So I basically looked at all kind of correlation. Obviously I don't necessarily imply causation, but correlation of properties of those municipalities. I had over hundreds indicators for each municipality, for instance, like the population size of the municipality, and whether, let me see, well, whether it's like a town or like a rural area and so on and so forth. If I go back here, I can just quickly show them how it looks like. So I tested all kind of correlation. I think there was tons of whatever significant stuff, but then I still like selected what I thought was more interesting to show. And what you've seen just before was made with data wrapper. Like it's a very simple tool to create like web graphics. And for instance, here I've seen that the French municipalities voted more for those two parties. And yeah, that's basically, and that script actually I use all the time. Every time there's a ballot, a federal ballot, I can like use all those properties of municipalities and compute correlation with whatever continuous variable. I just wanted to say regarding that article that the map here down here was made. It was R, is the leaflet. Was made with the HTML widget leaflet that you heard about it this morning, I think. In here, for instance, it just shows the 2% of municipalities where those two parties didn't like gain votes compared to 4 years ago. Yeah. Go back to more examples. Another very quick example is that healthcare premiums. So every year, as you know, we have like an increase in healthcare premiums, and I got the data. I think like end of the morning of all the healthcare premiums for the next years. I think there was over 250,000 different like prices depending on the canton and the premiums. And here I did more like an exploratory data visualization. Usually I don't do that, but I mean, you have to do something very quickly in one day. So I use ggplot2 to make this chart, and the interactivity is with gggraph, where we can, yeah, as you can see. So here's each of those lines, a canton, and it's the premium price for an adult, 300 Swiss franc premium. And it needed to have some kind of angle to that graphic, and I guess it's to show how much Vaud and Geneva are high regarding the healthcare premiums. So I mean, it's not a long article, it was really mainly just this graphic, but it was produced quickly thanks to R. Okay, all right, let me talk more about longer term investigation. I always don't often produce like stories in 1-2 days, even when I get the data. Fortunately, I have time to spend more time. And I'm going to show, for instance, the example of this story that I made with the Tamedia investigative team. We have some very great investigative journalists. And what we did is that we got from each cantons the flood risk areas, so regions where you could be easily flooded, like they predict could easily flood. And actually, is by law, I mean by federal law, every canton has to keep a precise like track of that. And actually, I cannot show you all the codes, but actually there was a huge amount of geospatial data of polygons, gigabytes of it. And what we did was to try to find where basically in Switzerland was where people was living actually in these areas. I had to compute all kind of overlapping of those flood risk with like schools or hospitals or just regular residential buildings. So for instance, I came with that number. That was thanks to R. I used the SF for that. That was really actually easy to like perform really heavy computation just on my laptop. Also the story that we found out that a third of the campings actually in very high danger flood risk in Switzerland. Again, I mean, there was quick analysis made with R, but then the journalists really went on those sites we pinpointed that was really problematic and like really did classic reporting. I want to show as well some of the more funky stuff you can do with R. So that's rather light story. So basically what I got in that story was the car immatriculation by Swiss municipalities, the car brand. And so all the charts I'm going to show on the graphics are made with R. And it's really light stories. It shows basically here on this map, you see the share of Mercedes, Audi, and BMW by municipality. So it ranged from pretty high, almost 30% to, I don't know, 10% in northern Canton de Vaud. And you can really see the effect around the lake. It's really like expensive brands of cars by the lake, which is not really surprising. That's where the usually wealthier people live. So looked at the ultra luxury cars brands here share, where we pinpointed to some of the municipalities with the highest like share of ultra luxury cars. Those two maps were made with ggplot2, SF, and gggraph for the interactivity. Then a slope graph to show the difference between Vaud and Geneva brands share market versus the world. And I'm pretty happy with this chart because first explain you what this chart is. It shows the distribution, I mean, all the price of the by model and by brands. And is to answer the questions, what's the difference between premium cars and luxury cars? So you can see basically the kind of how the different brands price their cars. And what I like is actually I used the bootstrap component in the Shiny package, although it's not a Shiny chart, to make it responsive, that it will flip, for instance, to a horizontal chart for mobile, and you have it like more on the like large view on desktop. And also here more maps that was also like layout with bootstrap to make, for instance, like one column on desktop and a grid. Sorry, a grid on desktop and one column on mobile. Yeah, so that's it for this light story. Those graphics actually and also ended up in the print, although I thought they did a horrible job laying out this page. What else? Also another light story I did with R was just to do some basic NLP. I'm not really familiar with technology. So basically the idea was to analyze all the 1st of August speech of the president. So every year, the 1st of August, to do a very formal speech. And I did like sentiment analysis to find the most like sad or like angry speech over the last 34 years. And again, for instance, that's how it looks like when I did the analysis, and to find which was the most like angry or joyful speech. And actually another journalists behind also just read all the speech and also tried to find the correspondence, and actually it agreed pretty well between the NLP analysis and his feeling. I'm not going to go into the details, but I just want to mention that, yeah, I used to, before when I was at the SRG, Swiss Broadcasting Corporation, I used to do a lot of graphics only with R, so with no data wrapper or that no graphic designer will touch after. I can show that's the examples are shown here. Now I do that less because I have very good other colleagues that can do a front-end development. But I've put some links for as examples. I would say that I used in the past a lot like HTML widgets in high charter. It's like the R wrapper for high charts. You can do quite a lot of nice things with it. Yeah, and we'll just say a few more words about more like the infrastructure for for my everyday work. So I use R really basically every day, and so much that I had to write my own package. Obviously, I would advise that nobody like clone or like fork that package because it's horrible. It's really meant for our use. It really only has high functions, high level functions. I'll just show an example of yeah, I kept track of the what data, for instance, the analysis I showed by municipality about the federal elections. It was basically relies on that package because I kept the indicators of all the about all municipalities from the Swiss Statistical Office, and every year those data are updated from a horrible Excel, but have the script that kind of can clean up that Excel and make a clean CSV out of it. So it's pretty well, I mean, defined for my needs. Yeah, it has some many mapping functions in there using SF. And I think that's mainly it. I'll just say a few words about the outlook. I think in the longer term, I think we're going to do try to do better templating of graphics with R, whether it's static graphic with ggplot2 themes. I mentioned here an example. BBC is actually publish in GitHub their own like BBC style guide, ggplot2 style guide, which is pretty nice. As well as for better templating for interactive graphics. So I mentioned data wrapper before. It's a tool we use a lot here to make web graphics. And actually there's a package from R where you can actually generate or update your data wrapper from R. I actually haven't used it yet, but I think that's something we should definitely look into. And I think all those HTML widgets are great. Surprisingly, I haven't used any Shiny of my Tamedia yet. The main reason is that we rarely do exploratory data visualization. And when we do, usually a web developer does it, but usually my boss doesn't want to pay for Shiny servers since we have quite a lot of traffic, but that's something I should look more into. As well, I should like to use more Reticulate, the package to integrate Python. As I said, most of my colleagues actually use Python, and it's I guess would be nice to because we use each other codes all the time. Because most of my colleagues are in the Swiss German part in Zurich, so it'd be nice to have easy way to collaborate on code as well. And obviously, I would be happy to do more technical stuff, but I guess as I said, the focus is really on the stories, not so much on the tech. Yeah, and I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Duc. It was very interesting. We have way too many questions for what we were going to have the time to cover. So I hope people are able to join in the room after the break. If I didn't get the chance to cover that question. I think one thing that most people were interested about is you mentioned you are using R Markdown to kind of draft the story. How does that story goes from R Markdown to the actual news site?
So yeah, I use R Markdown a lot, but never to really produce the production or the final results that goes on the newspaper, on the website. What I meant is I use it mainly to produce the reports that actually where I do analysis that I will share to pitch a story, for instance, to my boss, to share the results with another journalist. I think that's what I mainly use R Markdown for. I actually never use as it is the R Markdown document to go on the website or on the newspaper. Sorry if I wasn't clear about that.
Okay. How do you get the story out quickly enough? Have you ever missed out on reporting because someone else did a similar things and it felt like copying?
Yes, happens quite often, I have to say. I think it's okay to have the same idea, and I think we see in the news all the time the same story, but I guess when you work in data, you think you have more like a unique angle usually, but obviously the other data people, and no, that happens. But I would say, yeah, I will try to never take too long. I think if it really takes too long and it's too complicated and it's no longer like current, I would just kill the story. And if it's a recurrent theme, we'll say we'll do it next year or months or whatever, if it's possible. But yeah, to answer, I guess, your question more precisely, sometimes story dies before it can be published. That happens. And I think it happens in data journalism, but as well for regular journalists as well.
Okay, there are more questions, but just for the purpose of staying on time, we'll keep them for the breakout room after. Okay. Thank you very much.